Thanks. Let's take another round of questions.
I'm sorry, the Department of Health.
Yeah.
What's your name? I'm
Christine.
sorry. Hi, Christine. Carolyn Zesma, NYC Foodscape. I had a specific question about mobile healthy food markets. A quick background, I ran a food business plan competition out of Mount Sinai a few years ago, looking for healthy food business ideas all around the East Coast from business schools. We had a finals, Rick Lifkless was on the finals round, and we picked a winner who happened to just be from New York, who had a healthy food mobile market that also had both cooking classes. It had basically food kits that were very low cost. It would accept SNAP, et cetera, and they got $25,000 to run their business. The second place or third place was a Boston business. I only mention that because to date, the New York City-based business has not been able to launch as written because they cannot, and they've been told specifically, they are being treated like a food truck, which, as you may know, 5-year waiting list plus for a very expensive license. Now, there are some mobile healthy food businesses, the food carts, that are a very good model, but that's one specific model that sells, fruits and vegetables by foot, in essence. And then there is the Fresh program. So both of these are great programs, but there is a nimble way to bring food to neighborhoods that apparently has a large barrier. So that was a very long lead in to a question as to whether there's any talk or movement afoot within the health department to try to remove barriers for these food markets. So ironically, the point of the story is within 3 months of the awards, the Boston business, even though they didn't win the money, launched because Boston gave them the license immediately. And New York City has not been able, through many negotiations, we even incubated the project after the contest, et cetera, has not been able to launch by mobile. And there have been other food businesses apparently that have tried and similarly had the same treatment. So anyway, that was a very long lead into a very rhetorical question, but I am hoping that you do have a kind of maybe something on the horizon around mobile food trucks or healthy mobile food trucks and
Thanks.
markets.
Some more questions?
Does anyone have a question down here that I can drop one?
Maybe shout.
Shout.
I can shout. My name is Naomi Person, and I'm actually working with a nonprofit in East Harlem called SMART that won money from the city through the participatory budgeting process, which is happening now, for a mobile cooking classroom. So they've gotten capital funding through the city to get a van, not a van, but a trailer that's being designed now to go to places in the community where people who don't have access to food and cooking instruction can be trained. But, so that's, something that can be done. But my question is about funding these changes. I mean, when you think about city and state negotiations that are going on now in New York, I'm wondering if anyone can imagine a conversation that would include how we're going to fund it.
So I have a third question, and then I'll turn it over to you. That we all work for big organizations. The two of us work for City University of New York, Health Department, a large nonprofit. And I wonder if each of you could talk a little how you think about finding the balance in these big organizations between making the accessible, incremental changes that would change the shape of the public sector and the more transformative vision of the public sector playing a different role. So how do you think about that day to day? And obviously, many people here are in that same position and are thinking about what can they do, and I wonder if you have sort of thoughts about that, as well as the other questions we heard.
Sure. Funny enough, we were just having a conversation about this yesterday, sort of thinking about, I was talking to Mara and Sylvia, who, is that you up there? No. Yes, it is Sylvia, who's our farm manager, and sort of thinking about, what are sort of longer range plans. And obviously, CUNY, and we've talked about this ourselves, about leveraging purchasing power and sort of thinking about institutionally and logistically how CUNY could make some really large changes. When we think about, sort of smaller or more incremental changes, and I'll use the farm as kind of a hub to start the conversation, although I also teach for the culinary arts program, which I think is another place where change happens slowly but surely, is the idea of really getting food to be something that people hold in their minds at all times, to teach people to see the world through a food lens. Whether they're coming, and perhaps not everybody. We were talking, for example, at Kingsborough, this is not unusual. A student may encounter the farm because their sociology instructor brings them to the farm for a class project. They may then come back to the farm and work there as a student aide. They may start a conversation with Mara about where they might be going to grad school or what kind of work they might be doing, or a volunteer opportunity or an internship. For our culinary students, it's not unusual that 1 or 2 or 3 of them at a time is working on the farm. It changes the way they think about purveying. It changes the way they think about food in their own neighborhoods. When I, as an instructor, ask my students questions about how they view their food environments, we're also giving them the tools to start asking the questions, to start wondering why things look the way they do in Bed-Stuy, as opposed to the way that they look like when they go to downtown Brooklyn or they go to Union Square. Why is food different? It changes their career goals. So I think CUNY, it's twofold. I think we should be doing more in the lines of what the city's doing in terms of committing to how we purchase food, how we dispose of food, how we compost food, and types of food standards that we hold in our cafeterias is notorious. The types of food opportunities that we provide to students. I am all for putting food back into student development courses. Everybody has to take these courses. They cover health. They don't cover how to shop or how to cook food. This is not home ec. These are basic life skills. But I think in the classroom, there are so many of us across CUNY working in food that I think part of it is just becoming a little bit more intentional about helping students to create a series of sort of related experiences, questioning periods, exposures. I think there's a lot that we can do in the classroom as well to really change that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think that there's so much to do, and we are looking at kind of the landscape, and I think as you laid out, even so many opportunities, but we are working in a really constrained fiscal environment, as the previous question related to. And for us, even reduced federal funding as part of the Community Transformation Grant to do some of this innovative work that allows us some flexibility. And so I think there is always that tension of what the health department's role, or what the city government's role, with community-based organizations, advocacy groups. And I think there's no right answer, but certainly where I feel like there's innovation and some success is, for example, when we have our Shop Healthy program, we have a team of people that go into the bodegas. We have 7 sets of standards, which is low sodium foods, talk to them about working with their distributor, talking about displaying the produce. But that's not going to be sustained, and we're never going to have enough people to kind of keep moving on to new communities to do that work. The work is really sustained by working with community organizations, and we call it Adopt a Shop, and they adopt a bodega near them and go to them with cards that kind of say, I'm interested in low-fat milk and more fruits and vegetables, kind of showing the bodega owner that there is demand for those products, and then patronize it and maybe buy food for their institution. And one of the pieces is, I think, setting that up in a way that works. And for example, with Shop Healthy, we found that senior centers are just a great group to work with, and not something we expected, right? We thought there'd be other community-based organizations that maybe their programming would be a great fit. Senior centers didn't have any food programming, but the seniors, it's a very doable piece. They are happy to go to their local bodega. They're happy to buy those items. We do walking tours of the farmers markets. It's a routine project that they can do together, and it works really well. And then we move on with our kind of intensive support, but that tapping into that community organization is something that can sustain those changes. And I think the same with our nutrition food standards that are in place by mayoral executive order. Those are in place for all city agencies, but we've rolled them out to private and public hospitals across the city. We did intensive work to help private hospitals, in addition to public hospitals, change their cafeterias, change their vending machines, change their patient meals. but we won't have a registered dietitian on staff for forever to make those changes. But in a lot of cases, the hospitals have now taken that on. So it's kind of finding those points of leverage where we can provide materials and the standards and have done a lot of that research, but then having the organizations really embrace that change.
Is there anything you want to say about food trucks?
Oh, yes, so I don't know about the specifics, but I'm happy to have a further conversation about that because, right, there's a lot of licensing complications, there's many different types of licenses, so that all sounds like something that we could probably have a conversation with to kind of figure out where the issue is, but I know sometimes the wait for licenses is very long, but that sounds particularly long in that case, so I'd be happy to talk about that further.
And we've been thinking here at the Food Policy Center of doing a session on food trucks. And so we welcome suggestions for speakers and topics, probably in the early fall.
I think just really, really briefly that it's a combination of both radical incrementalism and looking for a big breakthrough every once in a while at the other end of a rethink and a re-understanding of the terrain. So the big thing, which I tried to draw attention to in that British Columbia example, is healthcare costs. And a friend of mine in Southern California who's a medical researcher said that he actually is optimistic, if you can believe it, that Obamacare will provide the basic facts within 3 years of allowing people to see where a lot of the unnecessary drugs and tests in the system can not actually do anything to increase health, and there could be potentially a rejigging of the whole system in the United States, which is so optimistic that it was hard to even hear. But it is true that primary prevention programs, investing in simple food solutions instead of mega drug company solutions is where the billions are. Everything we've just talked about is totally affordable if you could just, I think the World Health Organization calls for a 1% in investment of the whole global healthcare budget in prevention. The billions that'll be flushed down the toilet of drugs in this city tonight that cost billions of dollars instead of a woman who worked at Food Terror, who unfortunately died of breast cancer, once said, they'll buy me any amount of free chemotherapy, but they won't get me any healthy food. So that's the big paradigm shift. And that's why it's amazing to have the kind of allies you have lined up here to kind of do it. At the same time, we're all like scrambling for pennies, the nonprofit sector, all of the people on this panel are probably go back to our day jobs and are going to look at, cuts to budgets and all kinds of stuff like that. So then it's about the hopefulness that happens when all of CUNY decides they're going to start to grow food everywhere and eat food everywhere. So it's kind of, what's very exciting about the food movement is it is a movement. It's like the women's movement or the gay and lesbian liberation movement. It's just like 1,000 things happening everywhere that's moving forward in an energy that is not controlled by anybody. So there isn't a simple answer to where the money's going to come from, but all this stuff is really moving quickly. And your history, I think, our history in New York is a very interesting story around food. So it's got a lot of power.